In the quiet halls of the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study in 1955, a peculiar conversation unfolded between two of the greatest minds of the 20th century. Albert Einstein, then 76 years old and in his final months of life, sat across from a visiting neurologist named Marcus Klein. "The problem of consciousness," Einstein remarked, tapping his fingers gently on his desk, "may be the one puzzle where physics and biology must dance together." His eyes, still sharp and inquisitive, gazed out the window toward the campus grounds. "I sometimes wonder if the answer lies not in what we can observe, but in what we cannot." Dr. Klein nodded thoughtfully. The paradox of measurement in quantum mechanics and the paradox of subjective experience in neuroscience seem to be mirrors of each other. Neither man could have known then how prophetic their casual exchange would prove to be. In the decades that followed, these two seemingly disparate fields would indeed converge in unexpected ways, pointing toward what might be the most profound paradox of all, one that potentially explains the greatest mystery in science: consciousness itself. The story of this convergence begins not with the study of the mind, but with the peculiar behavior of the smallest constituents of reality. In the early years of the 20th century, physicists discovered that the fundamental nature of reality at the quantum scale defied common sense. Particles could exist in multiple states simultaneously, a phenomenon called superposition. They could influence each other instantaneously across vast distances, what Einstein famously called spooky action at a distance. And most puzzling of all, they seemed to require an observer to collapse from their ghostly, probabilistic existence into concrete reality. This measurement problem, as it came to be known, troubled physicists deeply. The mathematics worked perfectly, predicting experimental results with astonishing precision, but the implications were philosophically disturbing. Did consciousness somehow play a special role in determining physical reality? The very suggestion seemed to violate the objective foundations of science itself. When I first encountered quantum mechanics as a graduate student in 1978, recalls Dr. Aaron Ortiz, a theoretical physicist at the California Institute of Technology, my professors treated the measurement problem like an embarrassing relative at a family gathering, acknowledged but not discussed in polite company. For decades, most scientists followed suit, adopting what physicist David Mermin called the shut up and calculate approach. The equations worked. The philosophical implications could be shelved for later consideration. But not everyone was content to leave such profound questions unexplored. In 1989, the British physicist Sir Roger Penrose published The Emperor's New Mind, in which he proposed that quantum processes in the brain might be essential to consciousness. The book sparked controversy. Most neuroscientists dismissed the idea, pointing out that the warm, wet environment of the brain would cause quantum effects to decohere, essentially disappearing into classical behavior, far too quickly to be relevant to neural processing. But Penrose, joined by anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, persisted. They suggested that protein structures called microtubules within neurons could potentially sustain quantum coherence long enough to influence neural activity. While their specific proposal has not gained widespread acceptance, it opened a door to considering quantum effects in biology more broadly. As it turns out, nature had been exploiting quantum phenomena all along, right under our noses. In 2007, scientists discovered that European robins use quantum entanglement in cryptochrome proteins to sense Earth's magnetic field for navigation during migration. Later research revealed quantum coherence in the light-harvesting complexes of photosynthetic bacteria, allowing them to achieve near-perfect energy transfer efficiency. What we are learning, explains Dr. Melanie Kraft, a quantum biologist at the University of Cambridge, is that evolution has had billions of years to figure out how to harness quantum effects in warm biological systems, something we once thought impossible. Nature is a far more sophisticated quantum engineer than we ever imagined. While these discoveries did not directly address consciousness, they undermined a key objection to quantum theories of mind, that quantum effects could not survive in the brain's environment. Suddenly, the possibility that quantum phenomena might play some role in consciousness no longer seemed quite so far-fetched. Meanwhile, neuroscientists were making their own startling discoveries about the nature of conscious experience. In the 1980s and 1990s, researchers like Francis Crick and Christoph Koch began a systematic search for the neural correlates of consciousness, the minimum brain processes sufficient for specific conscious experiences. Their work, along with contributions from figures like Gerald Edelman, Antonio Damasio, and Giulio Tononi, revealed that consciousness is not localized to a single Cartesian theater in the brain. Rather, it emerges from the integrated activity of distributed neural networks. Consciousness appears to involve the synchronization of neural firing across different brain regions, creating a unified experience from disparate sensory inputs and internal states. The binding problem, how the brain creates a unified conscious experience from separate neural processes, remains one of the greatest challenges in neuroscience, notes Dr. Kraft. It is reminiscent of quantum entanglement, where separated particles behave as a single system. This similarity did not escape notice. By the early 2000s, a new generation of scientists began exploring the intersection of quantum physics and consciousness with greater mathematical rigor and experimental sophistication than their predecessors. In 2008, theoretical physicist Matthew Fisher of the University of California, Santa Barbara, proposed that phosphorus nuclear spins could serve as biological qubits, quantum bits that could potentially store and process quantum information in the brain. Unlike earlier proposals, Fisher's idea was specific enough to be testable, suggesting experiments to determine whether the brain might indeed exploit quantum effects. Fisher's proposal was significant because it identified a specific physical mechanism that could potentially support quantum effects in neural processing, explains Dr. Ortiz. It moved the discussion from speculative philosophy to testable science. But the most profound developments in understanding consciousness have come not from identifying where quantum effects might operate in the brain, but from recognizing fundamental similarities in the mathematical structures used to describe both quantum systems and conscious experience. In 2000, Giulio Tononi introduced Integrated Information Theory, IIT, a mathematical framework for understanding consciousness based on the integration of information within a system. According to IIT, consciousness corresponds to a particular kind of information integration measured by a value called phi, which represents the amount of integrated information a system contains. The higher a system's phi value, the more conscious it is proposed to be. A key insight of IIT is that consciousness is intrinsic to a system. It exists from the system's own perspective, not as observed from the outside. This intrinsic perspective bears a striking resemblance to the view from nowhere problem in quantum mechanics, where the universe as a whole has no external observer. In 2015, this connection was formalized by Johannes Kleiner and Sean Tull, who demonstrated that the mathematical structures of IIT are remarkably similar to those used in quantum mechanics. Both frameworks deal with information and perspectives in ways that defy classical intuitions. What Kleiner and Tull showed, Dr. Ortiz explains, is that the mathematics of consciousness in IIT and the mathematics of measurement in quantum mechanics are not just metaphorically similar, they are formally related. This suggests that the paradoxes in each domain might have a common resolution. This brings us to the central paradox that potentially explains consciousness, the observer-observation paradox. In both quantum mechanics and theories of consciousness, we face a circular problem. In quantum mechanics, we need an observer to collapse quantum states into definite outcomes, but the observer must themselves be made of quantum particles. In consciousness studies, we need a conscious observer to experience and report on consciousness, but that observer's own consciousness remains to be explained. It is like trying to see your own eye without a mirror, says Dr. Kraft. The very thing doing the observing cannot directly observe itself. This apparent circularity has led some scientists to propose that consciousness and quantum measurement might be two sides of the same coin, different perspectives on the same fundamental process in nature. According to this view, consciousness is not produced by the brain in the way that digestion is produced by the stomach. Rather, consciousness is what information integration feels like from the inside, while physical processes are what consciousness looks like from the outside. We might be making a category mistake, suggests Dr. Ortiz. Perhaps asking how the brain produces consciousness is like asking how lightning produces thunder. They are not causally related. They are different aspects of the same phenomenon. This perspective aligns with ideas proposed by philosophers of mind like Bertrand Russell and Galen Strawson, who argued for a form of neutral monism or panpsychism, the view that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality, rather than something that emerges only in complex brains. The evidence from quantum mechanics suggests that observation plays a fundamental role in determining physical reality, Dr. Kraft notes. And what is observation if not a primitive form of experience? Perhaps consciousness does not need to be explained in terms of something else. Perhaps it is itself an explanatory primitive. This view has gained support from recent developments in quantum foundations. In 2011, physicist Marcus Muller showed that quantum theory can be derived from simple assumptions about an agent's experiences, without presupposing any objective physical world beyond those experiences. This result suggests that experience, consciousness, might be more fundamental than we previously thought. Muller's work indicates that quantum theory might be primarily about how conscious agents exchange information, rather than about an observer-independent reality, explains Dr. Ortiz. This would place consciousness at the foundation of physics, rather than as a puzzling byproduct of neural activity. The paradox that potentially explains consciousness, then, is this: consciousness cannot be fully explained as emerging from non-conscious physical processes, because our very concept of physical processes already implicitly contains consciousness in the form of observation. The apparently circular relationship between observers and the observed might not be a problem to be solved, but rather a fundamental feature of reality, a feature that explains why consciousness exists at all. But how could such an abstract philosophical insight be tested scientifically? Remarkably, experimental evidence is beginning to accumulate. In 2019, researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences conducted an experiment testing the relationship between quantum uncertainty and subjective awareness. They found that participants' subjective reports of visual awareness correlated with measurable quantum uncertainty in their neural responses. The more quantum uncertainty present in the brain's response to a stimulus, the less certain participants were about having seen the stimulus. This experiment provides initial evidence for a direct link between quantum uncertainty and subjective uncertainty in conscious experience, says Dr. Kraft. It suggests that quantum indeterminacy might be reflected in the phenomenology of consciousness. Even more intriguingly, recent experiments by Dean Radin and colleagues have tested whether conscious intention can influence quantum systems directly. In a series of double-blind experiments, they found statistical evidence suggesting that focused attention can slightly alter the interference pattern in a double-slit experiment, the classic demonstration of quantum wave-particle duality. While these results remain controversial and require further replication, they hint at a direct connection between consciousness and quantum phenomena that goes beyond metaphor or mathematical similarity. The most conservative interpretation of these findings is that they reveal methodological flaws or statistical flukes, cautions Dr. Ortiz. But if they hold up under further scrutiny, they would suggest a more radical possibility: that consciousness and quantum behavior are linked in ways that our current scientific paradigm struggles to accommodate. The implications of such a connection would be profound. If consciousness is indeed fundamental rather than emergent, it would transform our understanding of reality itself. The hard problem of consciousness, why physical processes in the brain should give rise to subjective experience at all, might dissolve if consciousness is recognized as an intrinsic aspect of information integration, present to some degree in all physical systems. This does not mean that your coffee mug is having complex thoughts, clarifies Dr. Kraft. The kind of consciousness we associate with human experience requires the specific architecture of the human brain. But it does suggest that the capacity for some form of experience might be universal, a basic feature of the way information is structured in our universe. This perspective also offers a novel approach to the problem of free will. If conscious decisions are partly quantum processes, they would involve genuine indeterminism, outcomes not fully determined by prior causes. This would not provide freedom from natural law, but it would mean that our choices are not merely the deterministic playing out of initial conditions set at the Big Bang. Quantum indeterminism does not give us freedom in the sense of being able to violate the laws of physics, notes Dr. Ortiz. But it does mean that the future is not written in the past. There is room for novelty, for choices that are not predetermined by the prior state of the universe. Perhaps most significantly, recognizing the fundamental nature of consciousness would resolve the apparent conflict between the subjective world of experience and the objective world described by physics. These would no longer be seen as competing descriptions of reality, but as complementary perspectives on the same underlying process, like viewing a sculpture from different angles. Science has traditionally excluded subjectivity in its quest for objectivity, says Dr. Kraft. But this exclusion has left us unable to account for the very subjectivity that makes science possible. By recognizing consciousness as fundamental, we can bring the observer back into our picture of nature without sacrificing scientific rigor. This reconciliation would fulfill Einstein's intuition that the puzzle of consciousness requires both physics and biology working in concert. But it would go further, suggesting that consciousness itself might be the missing piece that allows us to understand how these domains connect. To appreciate the full implications of this paradox, we need to step back and consider the historical context. The split between subjective experience and objective reality has deep roots in Western thought, dating back at least to René Descartes' separation of mind and matter in the 17th century. This dualistic view created the conceptual space for modern science to develop by setting aside questions of consciousness to focus on measurable, physical phenomena. For centuries, this approach proved enormously successful. Physics, chemistry, and biology made tremendous strides by treating the universe as an objective reality that could be studied independently of subjective experience. But this success came at a price. The harder science pressed on fundamental questions, the more it seemed to leave consciousness out of the picture. By the early 20th century, this tension had become acute. The emergence of quantum mechanics forced physicists to confront the role of observation in determining physical reality. At the same time, advances in neuroscience began to reveal the intricate relationship between brain activity and conscious experience. The 20th century witnessed two revolutionary developments, observes Dr. Ortiz. Quantum mechanics showed us that objective reality cannot be completely separated from the act of observation. And neuroscience showed us that subjective experience cannot be completely separated from physical processes in the brain. These dual insights pointed toward a deeper unity that we are only now beginning to grasp. This unity suggests a resolution to what philosopher Thomas Nagel called the view from nowhere problem, the impossible demand that science provide an objective account of reality that includes subjective experience while excluding the perspective of any particular subject. The paradox of consciousness reveals that there is no view from nowhere, says Dr. Kraft. All information is relative to some perspective. What we call objective reality is just the limit of intersubjective agreement, the shared aspects of our subjective experiences that remain consistent across observers. This insight connects to recent developments in theoretical physics. In 2013, physicists Leonard Susskind and Juan Meldacena proposed the ER equals EPR conjecture, suggesting that quantum entanglement EPR and spacetime wormholes ER might be two descriptions of the same underlying phenomenon. This equivalence between information connection, entanglement, and physical connection, spacetime geometry, hints that the very fabric of reality might be woven from information and relation rather than from independently existing things. What we are discovering, explains Dr. Ortiz, is that information and experience might be more fundamental than either matter or consciousness as traditionally conceived. The universe might be more like a vast network of experiences than a collection of objects. This perspective aligns with ancient philosophical traditions from both East and West. The Buddhist concept of dependent origination, which holds that nothing exists independently of its relations to other things, bears a striking resemblance to the quantum mechanical principle of entanglement. Similarly, Alfred North Whitehead's process philosophy, which treats experiences rather than substances as the basic units of reality, anticipated many features of the emerging information-based view of consciousness. We may be witnessing a convergence of insights from multiple traditions, suggests Dr. Kraft. Modern science, having initially rejected subjective experience as a valid source of knowledge, has now circled back to find that experience might be woven into the very fabric of reality. This convergence is not merely theoretical. It has practical implications for fields ranging from artificial intelligence to mental health treatment. If consciousness involves quantum processes, it would suggest fundamental limits to our ability to simulate consciousness in classical computing systems. It might also point toward new approaches to treating disorders of consciousness, from insomnia to psychosis. Understanding the quantum aspects of consciousness could revolutionize how we approach mental health, says Dr. Kraft. For example, if certain psychiatric conditions involve disruptions to quantum coherence in the brain, treatments aimed at restoring this coherence might prove more effective than current approaches based solely on classical neurotransmitter models. Recent research supports this possibility. Studies of anesthetics, the only reliable way we have to switch consciousness off and on, show that many work by disrupting quantum tunneling in electron transport chains within neurons. This suggests that maintaining certain quantum properties might be essential for conscious awareness. Furthermore, abnormal quantum signatures have been detected in the brains of patients with conditions like schizophrenia and depression. While these findings are preliminary, they hint at a quantum dimension to mental health that current medical models do not address. The brain is not just a classical computer, emphasizes Dr. Ortiz. It is a quantum system, and understanding its quantum properties might be essential to understanding consciousness and its disorders. This quantum perspective on consciousness also offers a new lens on spiritual and mystical experiences. The sense of unity and dissolution of boundaries commonly reported in deep meditation, psychedelic experiences, and near-death states might reflect shifts in quantum coherence within the brain, temporarily altering the information integration that constitutes normal conscious experience. When a person reports experiencing oneness with the universe during meditation, they might be describing a real change in the quantum information structure of their consciousness, suggests Dr. Kraft. Not just a subjective feeling, but a genuine reorganization of the information processes that constitute their experience. Such experiences have often been dismissed as mere hallucinations or wishful thinking by mainstream science. But if consciousness has a quantum dimension, these experiences might provide valuable insights into the nature of consciousness itself. Insights that cannot be gained through third-person observation alone. First-person reports of consciousness have traditionally been treated as unreliable by science, notes Dr. Ortiz. But if consciousness is fundamental, these reports might be our most direct access to a fundamental feature of reality. They would be not just subjective reports about reality, but direct observations of reality itself. This perspective invites a reconsideration of the relationship between science and spirituality. Rather than being opposed approaches to understanding reality, they might be complementary methods for exploring different aspects of the same unified whole. The paradox that explains consciousness might also explain the persistent human intuition that there is more to reality than meets the eye, says Dr. Kraft. Not because consciousness requires something supernatural, but because consciousness itself is more fundamental than we previously recognized. This reconceptualization would fulfill William James's vision of a radical empiricism that treats both objective measurements and subjective experiences as valid data for scientific investigation. It would heal the split between the objective and subjective dimensions of reality that has characterized Western thought since Descartes. But perhaps the most profound implication of the consciousness paradox is what it suggests about our place in the cosmos. If consciousness is fundamental rather than incidental, then the emergence of self-reflective beings like humans is not an accident or a side effect of evolution, but the universe becoming aware of itself. We are not just observers of the cosmos, reflects Dr. Ortiz. We are the cosmos observing itself. Our consciousness is the universe's way of experiencing its own nature. This perspective transforms how we understand evolution. Rather than seeing consciousness as a strange byproduct of natural selection, useful for survival but metaphysically puzzling, we can recognize it as an intrinsic aspect of reality that has become increasingly complex and self-reflective through evolutionary processes. Evolution has not created consciousness from nothing, explains Dr. Kraft. It has shaped and elaborated the forms that consciousness takes, but the capacity for experience itself may be inherent in the informational structure of reality. This view resonates with what physicist John Wheeler called the participatory universe, the idea that conscious observers are not just passive spectators but active participants in the unfolding of reality. Through observation and experience, we help bring the universe into definite existence. Wheeler suggested that the universe requires observers to fully exist, notes Dr. Ortiz, not in the sense that nothing existed before humans evolved, but in the deeper sense that the capacity for observation, for experience, might be woven into the fabric of reality itself. This participatory vision of reality has been supported by quantum mechanical experiments like the delayed choice quantum eraser, which suggests that observations in the present can influence how we must describe the past. These results do not imply that human consciousness can change history, but they do indicate that the sharp division between observer and observed, between consciousness and physical reality, cannot be maintained at the quantum level. The delayed choice experiments reveal that we cannot separate the observer from what is observed, says Dr. Kraft. They are part of a single unified process, and this unity might be the key to understanding consciousness itself. As we stand on the threshold of this new understanding, we face both intellectual challenges and practical opportunities. The challenges include developing a rigorous mathematical framework that can bridge quantum physics and conscious experience, designing experiments that can test the proposed connections, and overcoming philosophical prejudices that have long separated the objective and subjective dimensions of reality. The opportunities include new approaches to artificial intelligence that recognize the potential quantum nature of consciousness, novel treatments for mental health conditions based on quantum coherence in the brain, and a deeper integration of first-person and third-person methods in scientific research. We are witnessing the early stages of a scientific revolution, predicts Dr. Ortiz. Not just in our understanding of consciousness, but in our conception of reality itself. The resolution of the consciousness paradox may require us to transcend the categories of physical and mental, objective and subjective, that have structured Western thought for centuries. This revolution would not overthrow existing scientific knowledge, but rather integrate it into a more comprehensive framework, one that can accommodate both the objective world described by physics and the subjective world of experience. It would fulfill Einstein's vision of a unified understanding where physics and biology dance together to explain the wonder of conscious experience. The paradox that explains consciousness is not really a paradox at all, concludes Dr. Kraft. It is a revelation, a recognition that the apparent circularity in our attempts to explain consciousness points to its fundamental nature. Consciousness does not need to be explained in terms of something else because it is itself an explanatory primitive, a basic feature of information integration in our universe. As we continue to explore this frontier, we may discover that the greatest mystery is not how consciousness emerges from non-conscious matter, but how we ever came to think of matter as non-conscious in the first place. The resolution of the consciousness paradox might reveal that we have been living in an aware universe all along, that consciousness is not the exception in a dead cosmos, but the rule in a cosmos that is intrinsically alive with the potential for experience. This perspective transforms our understanding of ourselves and our place in nature. We are not isolated minds in an indifferent universe, but expressions of a cosmos that is fundamentally experiential. Our consciousness is not an accident or an epiphenomenon, but an essential aspect of a reality that is as much about experience as it is about matter and energy. The paradox that explains consciousness, then, is that consciousness explains itself. It is both the question and the answer, both the mystery and the solution. And in recognizing this circularity not as a logical flaw but as a profound insight, we may finally begin to understand the greatest wonder of all, the simple fact that we are here to wonder in the first place.